This is NEAF Talks. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the hardest working MC in the cosmos, Vincent Coulihan.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, and welcome back for our keynote speaker for Sunday. But before I introduce our speaker, I certainly, from the staff and the board of directors from the Rockland Astronomy Club, we want to thank you all for being here at NEAF 2024. It's never going to be successful unless we have participation from the audience and from out in the field house. So we send a big thank you to all of you, and we offer you a big round of applause. Thank you. So for our keynote speaker today, he is a research scientist, he's a research chemist, scientist, space science journalist, photographer, and website reporting of up close and all things related to NASA. His talk today is Eyewitness, the NASA human and robotic missions and what's ahead for the upcoming NASA spaceflight. Please give a real warm welcome and hello to NEAF, Dr. Ken Kremer.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, thanks all for coming at the final program here. And my wife was just here, and I hope you enjoyed her talk. I know she had a nice big crowd, and there was a lot of nice claps at the end. We work together now, and she has that book, and she is right there. I think I don't have a pointer here, unfortunately, but there she is on the top left and right. So I'm going to cover a couple things about human and robotic explorers, and I'll just make a little joke. I had to come up with this at the last minute as a fill-in speaker, and if they had just given me 6 hours instead of 5, it would have been more polished. So anyway, I was working on this morning, so hopefully you'll enjoy it. So we also did just come from the eclipse, so I'll talk a little bit about that. Artemis commercial crew with Starliner and Crew Dragon. Robotic missions that we see, like Lucy and Psyche I just saw. And then we have launches and landings with SpaceX and Mars, my favorite planet, and I'm covered in planets here. And launches and landings from them. And then, like I said, the planets, there's Perseverance and Ingenuity. And so let's go to the next slide. Okay, I have it right here. So that's what she talked about, needles to nebulas. Her book, she's out there signing right now, and we just came from the eclipse in Indiana, and we had great weather. I hope some of you had a chance to see it. And again, there it is, and endorsed by a whole bunch of astronauts, including Bob Cabana, who was the keynote speaker yesterday and is a friend of ours. And he gave a fantastic talk about the ISS. He was the first assembly mission. He commanded the first assembly mission of the ISS. And he was very gracious. He just retired from NASA. And so we had a great time with him yesterday, and I hope some of you got to hear that talk. And because I'm going to cover a little bit about that too, about the different aspects of the ISS and how it was built, and you know what's the future, because that's how we are astronauts are in space right now. So I do a lot of TV interviews, domestic and international. So we're trying to get the word out all the time about how important it is to support NASA and science. I am a scientist. I work down the road at what was Wyeth and what was Letterly and Cyanamid, Wyeth, and it's now Pfizer. I'm very proud of the work that I did to make medicines to save people's lives. And in fact, some of the COVID research was done in Germany. It was also done in the labs where I used to work as an organic chemist. So I didn't work on COVID, but I'd made other medicines there, and I'm very proud of that, and we got to keep supporting science. There is a lot of anti-science attitude in our country right now, unfortunately. We got to support science, we got to support research. So I hope you'll do that. Thank you. So let me start off with the eclipse. We went to Indiana. Initially, we were going to go to Texas, but you know, the weather turned bad, and there were a lot of crowds. So we decided to go to the Midwest, to Evansville, there in the bottom center of that eclipse slide, and turned out to be great. And we were there. We had our lucky launch trolls with us. They're normally for launches, but we put them into duty as eclipse trolls, lucky eclipse trolls, and they worked. All right, and we had them there, and I was at both eclipses in 2017 and 2024. Some of my friends up there in the top right in Buffalo didn't have so much luck. They didn't see any clouds. I mean, they didn't see much eclipse. They saw a lot of clouds. So we were very lucky. The night before, the weather guy promised us we'd have good weather, and we picked a really sweet spot. See there, the green in the middle. Okay, the green in the middle and the two ends were the best spots. Texas turned out to be, for the most part, pretty awful. And my wife was there, Jean, and she, again, has the lucky launch trolls wearing the eclipse glasses, and there's her twin sister who's in the book, too. And so there's our, again, we had I had a whole bunch of cameras working, so it was really fortunate, and we've been running around. We went back, we saw the eclipse, we came back to Florida, where we live now, finished up, and then we had to drive up to here. So we haven't had much rest, so I posted these 3 pictures so far. We had wonderful totality for 3 minutes and 3 seconds, got solar prominences. I haven't had time to do a whole bunch of processing yet, but you could see some sunspots in the first picture, totality in the second one, and then the diamond beads coming out in the third one. And there's Jean with the lucky launch trolls at the bottom left, and she took this picture on the bottom right. An airplane just came at the end of totality, made a beautiful, beautiful shot. So when we were there on the Ohio River, where there's a big bend, and I wanted to get a nice foreground shot, a wide view, and I managed to do that here with the Willard Library on the right. It's a 139-year-old public library, and it is really a spectacular place with wonderful wood-carved and pressed wood inside. And so we had a really nice crowd. It was not gigantic. I know some areas, they were nose-to-nose people, they told me, up in Vermont. Well, we had a really nice crowd. It wasn't that crowded. There were plenty of people there. They had a really great eclipse show in the museum the night before. And we did get to see, you can see it in this wide shot. Okay, I've enlarged it at the top. Besides the library, you could see the eclipsed sun, and you could also see Venus. And we also saw Jupiter. It's barely visible, but it is there right above the library. So, and then there's Jean holding up her obsidian, and before the eclipse began. So that was really spectacular. We're really lucky. We donated a copy of her book to the library there. I never know anything about Evansville, but we had a wonderful time. These people were really great, and very, very forward and progressive thinking. So we donated a book to them. And we're really glad, and I hope you got to see the eclipse, because you know the next one in the US isn't for a really long time, not for another 20 years, okay? And that one is going to be in Alaska, well, in about 7 years, but it'll only go in 2044, which is through Canada and Montana and the Dakotas. But the next year, if we're still alive, is going to be really spectacular. It'll be another eclipse across America in 2045. And it turns out, right there in Florida is going to be, that's where we live now, right in the middle of the eclipse zone. The last one I watched from South Carolina, but this is going to be in Florida. Almost the whole state of Florida will have totality. And we're at the Space Coast, and guess what? That's just about on the center line. So I expect it to be very popular, and I really hope that we're around, and I hope some of you get to see it and come down and see space launches. And guess what? We have them all the time. We have a really critical one coming up with the Boeing Starliner. You know, it's been delayed quite a few years, over 4 years since actually SpaceX launched their first Crew Dragon. But they're finally going on here. There's something wrong with this slide. But anyway, yeah. Anyway, let me go back. Yeah, kind of like two overlapping slides. Anyway, that's the Boeing Starliner. They just rolled it out, and we missed it. We missed the rollout because we had to get here. Rollout of the capsule. Now it's being placed on top of the Atlas V rocket that you see in the launch there. We met some of the astronauts, the Suni Williams and Mike Fink there. Suni will be on the first flight with Butch Wilmore, and you can see them over here in the bottom right, all 6 astronauts for the first 2 missions. So we meet a lot of astronauts, and that's what they literally did Tuesday morning. And there's a schematic there, Starliner at the top. There's 2 solid rocket boosters for the first stage of this Atlas V rocket, which is being retired. There's only about 15 of them left. 7 of those missions will be for the Starliner to the International Space Station. And that'll give us a second way to get to the space station, besides the Crew Dragon that's launched about 9 crews so far, as Bob Cabana talked in detail about yesterday. And I'll talk a little bit more about it today. But this is my remote camera shot from the last mission, OFT-2. You know, that's actually 2 unmanned missions because they had a lot of problems in the first flight. And there were a lot of delays even to get this crew up. Even until the last second, they had to do extra parachute testing and replace a lot of tape that turned out to be flammable. So this got delayed a few months. And in fact, it would have been just about now under the most recent schedule. But luckily now it's going May 6th. So we're going to have to leave tomorrow to get back there for the launch and set up we probably won't even set up the cameras. We're just going to get there in time to see the launch Monday evening. Yeah, it's about 10:30 at night. We got about 2 days to get there. So we're just hoping. In fact, if it delays a day, I'll be happy. But we won't know that until Thursday because that's when they will do the flight readiness review. So we'll see. Anyway, it's really important that this succeed. Crew Dragon test flight was 4 years ago with Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley, and now we have Bruce Wilmore and Suni Williams, both very experienced NASA astronauts, and they're going to be flying hopefully in about 2 weeks. So, and they'll go to the International Space Station. That's basically what it looks like right now, and they will dock at this end here, the lower end. This is where the pressurized mating adapter is, and that's where the U.S. Commercial cruise spaceships dock. And you can see the Columbus module on the left, the Japanese modules on the right. There's the solar array truss, and there's the Soyuz capsule at the very top in the middle there. And ISS is real critical. It's a proving ground for the Moon and Mars. Mars is a 3-year round trip. So we're using the ISS not just for research experiments, which is really important on the human body and on looking at Earth and looking out for astronomy. There's a lot of astronomy going on. Alpha magnetic spectrometer is there. And, but it's a proving ground too. What does that mean? That means, you know, we cannot afford to have components fail when the astronauts are going to Mars, because it's a 3-year round trip. You just can't come back. It's not like the Moon, 3 days there, 3 days back. It's 9 months there. And so if we can test out these technologies and perfect them, they really have to be foolproof and failure-proof. And that is a major mission of the ISS right now. So it does a lot of research, but it's also preparing us for the future. We want to go back to the Moon with Artemis, and it's a proving ground for that, and then eventually Mars. So let me talk a little bit about Artemis. SpaceX was awarded a contract for the human lander, Starship. They've had 3 test flights so far, and none of them have been completely successful yet. Third one was more successful than the other 2, and it's got to work, because this is how we will put our astronauts back on the Moon, and we're going to the South Pole. Why are we doing that? That's where the water ice is. So when you can mine the water ice, you get hydrogen, which is rocket fuel, and oxygen, which is also rocket fuel, but breathable air. Then we don't have to bring them from Earth, which costs a fortune. We can live off the land. And then we also have water to drink. So, and they have plenty of, well, they don't have that much energy at the South Pole, but they will have enough. So anyway, we won't have to bring everything they need to live when we go to the South Pole. And we've never been there. Apollo was mostly equatorial, was all equatorial, I should say. And that we haven't been back to the Moon in 50 years, thanks to very short-sighted, dumb politicians, okay? We could have gone back a a long time ago. In my opinion, we never should have stopped going to the moon. And if we had gone to the moon, we'd be at Mars now. So that's the way it is. And NASA's budget is under attack. You need to know that. President Biden strongly supports NASA. Unfortunately, there is a radical group in the other party that has forced these cuts. So instead of a 6 or 7% increase to NASA, there's now a 10% cut. And that is across the board. That means cancer research is cut too. Does anybody think that's a good idea? No. I'm a cancer researcher, and now I'm a cancer survivor too. So I know how important it is. I used to help other people, and now I'm doing treatments. And so we got to support science. That's why I said it before. And it was across the board cuts, so you know what? Please vote for people who support science and believe in science. It's one of the most important things, I tell you. Plus, we need to have American leadership in space, okay? Not leadership from our adversaries. And when our budget gets cut, like Artemis, okay, those missions are delayed. And guess who is going to the moon? China. Do you think they delayed? No, they're not. They're pushing full steam ahead. So if we want to fall behind, then that's what is going to happen with these budget cuts. So we need to push ahead. So anyway, we have our Artemis program. It's composed of Orion, the SLS rocket. Here's a cutaway view of it, and I've seen, with Gene, we've seen all the components up close. It's a lot of rings and barrels to build it together. This core stage is basically a recycled space shuttle hardware, but they lengthened the external tank. I wish I had a pointer I could point it out. But this is the external tank, but it's been lengthened, 212 feet now, about 20 foot longer. And so now we're also recycling the Space Shuttle main engines, which are now renamed the RS-25s, and they've increased their power. And there's 4 of them, 16 were recycled from the shuttle. And so now we have 8.8 million pounds of thrust. And we had a successful first mission, Artemis 1. That's what I will talk about. There we are at the rollout. I'm going to show you a lot more pictures, but I'm going to run through them quick so we don't go over time. And I don't see the timer actually moving. Okay, so anyway, that's us, Gene and me. Here we are at one of the rollouts. That's the VAB. That's where they assemble it. That's where they assemble the shuttles. Okay, and you see how close we get to be because we're media and because we do public outreach. That is why we are here today. That is how I got Bob Cabana and many other top NASA speakers, because we help NASA, we support NASA, and I hope you do too. And that's what we're doing, outreach to build support. So you need to go to your communities too and help out. So yeah, I've covered it for many, many years. Here's the EFT-1. This was 10 years ago when they first tested the Orion capsule. And there it is on the right. And now you can see it on display in the gateway. Go back, if you haven't been to the visitor complex at the Kennedy Space Center, you need to go. There's been a lot of improvements. The shuttle's been there about 10 years in the Space Shuttle Atlantis building. But now they've also got on display a lot of real rocket hardware, including the Orion capsule from EFT-1 is on display there and in the gateway exhibit. So here's the real Orion that launched on Artemis 1. We saw that in the operations and checkout building, and they're now named after Neil Armstrong. Here's another view of it. So they wrapped it up in this cloth to protect it. We saw the rollout then to the VAB. I'll show you the individual components. Here's now the RS-25 engines, again, recycled from the space shuttle, about the size of a car, 16 of them. After that, they got to build new ones. So we have enough for Artemis 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now there's only 12 left. And they do testing at Stennis a lot. And here it is, and they have a new brain controller. And that way now we have about 8%, 9% more thrust, which helps out. So that's how you get 8.8 million with longer solid rocket boosters and more powerful RS-25 engines. So then you bring all the components here well, not here, down to KSC, about 1,000 miles from here. I moved 1,000 miles along Route 1, okay? And so to wind up in the same place. And here you can see there's even a SpaceX returned rocket there when the Pegasus barge brought the core stage, it's called the core stage, to the Kennedy Space Center. That was about 2.5 years ago, 3 years, actually 3 years ago, in April 27. So this is where we get to be. This is the press site. This is what you see on TV all the time, and that's where we report from. So they brought the core stage out, rolled it out. We get to walk around, see all this. I showed this very quickly. And then they roll it into the VAB, and we're right there. And so these are all my pictures. And I can share them with you. The RS-25s are already attached. And then if we bring it into the VAB, you can see the white components there. And over here, these are the solid rocket boosters. They started stacking them. And then they attached the core stage to that. Now, this is a Pathfinder, just to show you what it's like, because they didn't let us come in for the real for the real core stage. But it gets lifted, you know, they roll it in, and then they lift it up vertically, and then over the gangway, and then back down, just like the shuttle, with these huge cranes. You can see the yellow crane at the top. And this is my fisheye camera. So this is just a gigantic thing. We have to get it inside that cavity there. And so then it was placed between the two solid rocket boosters, and that's all attached. Here's some close-up views of it. There's us. This was during COVID times, and it's taken shape, so it just looks spectacular when we get to see it. We get to report about it. There's Gene inside the VAB, and then it rolls out to the pad and gets ready for launch. And we had 2 scrubs finally launched on the 3rd attempt in November, about 1.5 years ago. And there we are at the pad, and as it's rolling out. And again, there's Bill Nelson, the NASA administrator, also a friend of ours. And it's just wonderful to have all these, they're all great people. And they're very open and helpful to us, and that's why we want to help them too. And so here's, again, we're bringing all the components together. There's the Artemis on the left, and now we have it fully assembled. Here you see some close-up of the Orion at the top there. So this shows the fueling of the rocket, you know, 500,000 gallons of liquid hydrogen, 500,000 gallons, and 200,000 gallons of liquid oxygen. Part of the scrubs first time around was they had to learn how to fuel the rocket, and there were also some leaks in the system, in the tail service mast there at the bottom, which is shuttle heritage. Eventually it was figured out, and so they got to launch, and they finally did launch on November 16th on what was called a short class mission, 26 days, but that's the longest a human-rated spacecraft has ever gone into deep space. And yeah, the pictures are a little distorted, unfortunately. But anyway, there's the launch, and that bird just sat there. We always hope that a bird will be there. And he just sat there for 8.8 million pounds of thrust. He didn't move, except he just opened and closed his beak like that. It was amazing. And so we're really, really happy to get that. And here's another one of my remote camera shots and in transit. These were just unprecedented views. It looks like on this side the moon and Mars got cut off. But look at that. There's a picture of the Earth with a camera on the solar array looking back at our beautiful home planet. You can see the moon there. Here's an inside view of the capsule. They had a dummy in there equipped with a radiation vest. And there's a close-up of the moon. Look at that as it's approaching the moon, arriving in lunar orbit a year and a half ago. Yeah, I think some of these pictures got a little doubled. But here, look at this one. This is just absolutely spectacular. Look at the Earth at the limb of the moon from a camera on board these solar arrays. Just wonderful. Never had pictures like that, even from Apollo. So Artemis 2 yeah, that's a typo. Now it's 2025 instead of 2024. That just changed a little while ago. And Artemis, and yeah, this is Artemis 1, Orion, splashed down off the Pacific. And Artemis 2 is now targeted for September. It had been the end of this year, but there's some issues with the heat shield. There's a little bit of charring on the heat shield when it came back to the Earth at 25,000 miles an hour. There were char bits that were bigger than expected. And so they're still working on a resolution for that. Otherwise, we would have been on target. And they're doing another review. I was just talking with the NASA people, and I hope to complete that review, another independent review. They've had multiple ones in June. And so when that's done, then they'll be able to move forward. They'll either decide, yes, it's okay, or they have to do some more work on the heat shield. Hopefully, they will not have to do that. So, but this mission is, here's a schematic. So whereas Artemis 1 went into orbit around the moon, Artemis 2 is actually going to do a loop like Apollo 13. It's not going to go into orbit around the moon. It turns out they don't have enough thrust on the rocket for this particular mission. And they want to just keep the astronauts as safe as possible. So they're going to minimize the thruster firing, so they won't do one to put it in lunar orbit the way they did on Artemis 1. So it'll be about a 10-day mission, and they're right now targeting September. And it's the first time in more than 50 years that that will happen. And just to go back to that again, and it's going to be a multinational and crew and multiracial crew. The first woman is going to the moon, Christina Koch, very nice lady. Victor Glover, the first African American, and there'll even be a Canadian astronaut, Jeremy Hansen. We met him, and I showed a picture of them all. We met them a few months ago. They're a great crew, and we wish them the best of luck. And Artemis is an international program because the Europeans are helping us, the Canadians are helping us. Canada is building a robotic arm for the Lunar Gateway, which is going to be a moon orbiting space station. Europeans are building a module for the gateway. The Japanese are now going to build a lunar rover, the pressurized one. NASA just announced the unpressurized lunar rover, but they're going to do a pressurized one, and Japan will do that. That's going to be a big funding help. And so there'll be Japanese astronauts landing on the moon. They'll actually be the first ones, probably beyond Americans. But there will also be a woman on the moon, too. The first woman and the first person of color, not just orbiting the moon, but landing on the moon, and that's really spectacular. We need all of Earth to work together on this. So now I'll talk just a little bit about SpaceX. How do they do all those launches? They're going to do. They did about 80 last year. They're going to do over 100 this year, and it's all because they recycle their rockets. They landed on the first stage on the barges in the ocean most of the time, but sometimes also they land them right back at the Cape. And here you see my shot, the landing legs coming out, and it is just barely above the ground. It's passing through the sound barrier just above the ground, and that's why you hear the sonic booms. And if you ever have a chance, you want to see that. It's pretty rare to have landings back at the Cape, but spectacular. And I'll tell you, when there's a Falcon Heavy and there's 2 boosters coming back, it's about 10 times the sounds and 10 times the excitement. And even to just see one is so exciting. So then they've perfected it. They have over 200 booster landings to date. So they're continuing with that. There's a lot of launch pads. This shows the launch pads on the Cape. And you can watch from Titusville, is where we live, is actually the best because you can look right across the water. You can see ignition. But if you go down here to the curved part where the pier is, yeah, you get a nice view of the landing, but you don't really get a great view of the launch. Once it clears, because you don't see it until it clears the trees. So you really want to have an opportunity to see ignition, and that's Titusville. If you want to see the landing, then you would definitely want to go here. And so you have to make some trade-offs. So I'll talk briefly about the Psyche mission. It's not polished because I just was creating this all this morning. And that's the first mission to a metallic asteroid, okay? We just returned samples with OSIRIS-REx of organic compounds, and that's what I am. I'm an organic chemist, so that's real exciting. That's going to help us figure out how life originated on the Earth and what might it be elsewhere in our solar system. Because these asteroids and comets are filled with organic molecules and ice. So we just brought those samples back. So they're going to be real exciting. But we've never visited a metallic asteroid before. So and it's broken apart. So we'll be able to look at the core of a planet, and that'll teach us a lot about planetary evolution. So I get to go in the clean room with that. It's one of the features, one of the privileges sometimes of the media. When we do outreach, again, some very limited group of people of the media get to be in the clean room with these spacecraft. So that's me with Psyche and in a bunny suit, which I wore many times as a chemist, just down the road. And there's the Psyche team there. And here's a model, kind of like a sculpture of what it could look like. And of course, we don't know what it looks like. But it's really going to be very dark, and it's going to be really spectacular when we get there. Here it was launched on a Falcon Heavy, okay? First Falcon Heavy to launch a planetary mission for NASA. And those boosters on the side are recycled. The center core is new. And we have our lucky launch trolls again with Gene, and they worked out because we had a great launch. Those are the same ones we had at the Eclipse, okay? And so there's our flight-proven launch trolls. And there's her book. And with the rocket before it launched, you can see how dirty those are. And so they were just reused. And another thing, I'm not going to have time to talk about it today, is real exciting mission is Europa Clipper. I don't have a picture, but I'll talk about it now. We're going to launch that Europa mission to Jupiter, and then it will go into these long looping orbits and collect data about Europa, an underground ocean, which is probably the most likely place after Mars that could have life. And so anyway, what am I talking about? Because those side boosters from Psyche are being recycled to Europa Clipper, okay? And that'll be the 6th time that they use. So Europa Clipper will benefit from this mission. They were recovered, and it will have a future, and that'll be then the finale of those boosters. But, and again, it saves a fortune to recycle these boosters. They've probably cut the cost by 60% at least. And now Elon Musk, you know what he does? Now he charges, that was supposed to save money, right? And it does. But now what he does is he charges money for a used rocket, more money than a new rocket. So he's making money everywhere. So, and here I am, I love Mars. Not going to go in too much detail about it today, but there I am with Curiosity 10 years ago. And again, it's just such a privilege. And I'm showing this also because I create these Mars rover mosaics. And a bunch of you might know APOD, Astronomy Picture of the Day. I have more than a dozen APODs, mostly from my mosaics from the Mars rovers. And, Curiosity is also an organic chemist like me. And that middle image, the first one is at APOD. And it is the rover raising its arm looking to Mount Sharp, which is the target of the mission. And in that middle one, that's Yellowknife Bay, and that's where she took her first sample. And you know what she found? Organic molecules. And so what does that mean? That helps us figure out if there was ever life there before. Okay? So really critical. And there's a last one is a self-portrait. So really love it. And it's lasted a lot longer because of the nuclear power. I did a lot of mosaics from Spirit and Opportunity. Those were solar powered, but cleaned many times by the dust devils. And that's why they lived a lot. And what's new on this mission, too, is a helicopter. So here at the Kennedy Space Center, they had a mock-up. And this shows you the size of the rover, Perseverance, with Ingenuity, the helicopter, underneath. And I'll show you how that was deployed here in a moment. I was at the launch on an Atlas V. Here's just one of my shots of it taken off. And these are a couple of my first mosaics from the rover after it landed in 2021. It's still going strong today, and it's collecting sample tubes, which we'll get to in a minute. And then here's on the belly. This is where they loaded the helicopter. On the belly, it was all folded up. So I created this mosaic to show you how it was deployed. How it was deployed. See that? Lowered down, the feet extended, and then dropped, basically. So let's just go back through that again. See that? Then the feet go down, and then it gets deployed, and, oh wait, I'm going the wrong way, sorry. And so then, this is another self-portrait, and I put this together. This is over 100 images with the robotic arm. Okay, it has a robotic arm. You don't see it. People wonder, how does the rover take a selfie? Well, just the way you do. You put it at the end of your hand, and what the rover does, moves it left and right and up and down, and it takes a lot of pictures. And what I do as a citizen scientist in this case is put these images together. And you know what? NASA used this in their report, in their highlight, 50 years of Mars exploration. They use my image. Okay, so that's my mosaic, not NASA's, but I always give credit to NASA because it's ultimately their image. But this is a mosaic of over 100 images. And you can see, after it was deployed to the surface, the rover rolls away and then exposes Ingenuity, and it's got solar panels there on the top. And it's just absolutely spectacular. Here's another view, okay? In April, that was about 3 months after, 2 or 3 months after it landed. Here, I put this one together, and it had done 29 after the first year. Now it has reached over 70, but it just had an issue. It was only going to be used 5 times, right? Just 5 times. And I said to them, you know, like many people, that was crazy. And so I said to them at one of the briefings, you know, why don't you just fly it ahead? Maybe that would be useful. And then the rover could come and greet it. Might there be some use to that? And you know what? That is exactly what they did. They kept moving it ahead and using it as a scout after the 5 initial missions. So, and there it is on Flight 29. Again, a mosaic of a couple of images where you see it, and then more landscape images I did here. And then here's one of my APODs, the last one I had, with Perseverance, Sol 354, for 1 year on Mars. And there's the nuclear power source and the Gale crater in the background there. Jezero crater, I should say. Gale crater is Perseverance. I mean, Curiosity. Here's some more mosaics I made. And so it collected these samples. It's collecting samples, I should say. And for what? Because it can't analyze these samples the way Curiosity can. It doesn't have those 2 labs. Curiosity has an organic chemistry detector and an inorganic chemistry spectrometer, and then sends the data back. And that's how we figured out there's organic molecules at Gale crater. So what the mission was, was they added a sample caching mechanism, okay, to the rover. And these are some of the samples. They're in the front of the rover. And then they drop them to the ground to be picked up in the future by Mars Sample Return. You know, that's the holy grail of Mars research, is to bring back a sample from a really important place. Jezero crater was determined to be, by the scientists, the most likely place where we could figure out if life ever existed on Mars, past, present. Okay? It's really hard today because of all the radiation. So the plan is, or was, unfortunately, to send a future mission called Mars Sample Return to collect these samples. It has 42 sample tubes. Here you see about 10 of them or so. And so they had this architecture. And there's Ingenuity flying. And because it flew so many times, it's actually going to help with the sample retrieval. It is going to have, the plan was to have a new Mars ascent vehicle here, stationary lander right there. And it would have 2 helicopters. And those helicopters would go and retrieve those samples that I just told you about. And Perseverance also is holding some of the samples, and with its robotic arm would bring some of those samples to the Mars ascent vehicle lander. It has its own robotic arm, and grab those samples and then store them, and then eventually launch them for the first time from Mars into Mars orbit. And then in the middle there, you see the Earth return vehicle being built by Europe. So you've seen The Martian? It's a lot like that. All right, with the Mars ascent vehicle, and then they meet the return vehicle, and then they come home. and it is going to be really tricky because, you know, they have to meet while they're all orbiting at very high speed. So, and then that would return the samples to Earth that you see there on the upper left. And the goal was to do that by 2033 or so. Well, now because of these budget cuts, because of these, I like to call them the bean-counting, budget-cutting buffoons, NASA's budget cut 10%. So what do you think they cut? They had to cut across the board. So Mars sample return, instead of $850 million, is only getting about $250 million this year. So that is like crazy. So you know what that means? It's almost the end of the mission. So you know what they had to do with JPL? Lay off 8% of the whole workforce. So it's a severe impact. But guess what China's doing? They have their own Mars sample return mission, and they are not pulling back. They're going full speed ahead. So if we can this, it'll be the Chinese who get the first samples back. Okay? I think we should do that. But so you can thank those radicals in that party for that. Hopefully things will change in the future, but right now, NASA has just last week said we need a new architecture because it's too expensive and the money is not there because of these budget cuts. So they're asking industry and academia to come up with a much more simple plan. They won't be able to bring it back, all 42 of those samples probably. The baseline now is 10, so we'll see what happens. But these budget cuts, the point is, it impacts NASA, it impacts medical research. I mean, I have prostate cancer. I benefited from new research in the last 3 years, okay? And if that research hadn't been done, I wouldn't have benefited from that. And your family and friends and relatives, they won't benefit from it either. So we gotta support research. It's not just NASA that's cut. It's medical research, cancer research. To me, that's just completely immoral because guess who benefits from medical research? Everybody. Every one of you in that audience and your family benefits from medical research. So just real quickly, here's a little run through from the SpaceX Dragon. We get to see those astronauts. That's me there in the black shirt made by Gene. And the astronauts come and we get to see them, and that's what we're going to go do with the Starliner at the end of this week. And we get to see them then walk out from the ONC and drive to in those Teslas to out to pad 39A. And then here's the SpaceX Crew Dragon, should say. It's the Cargo Dragon also. It has both logos on it, the meatball and the worm. And then launches to the International Space Station. So thank God we're not dependent on the Russians anymore. We still fly with them, which is really good, but they also fly on us. So that's the way it was in the shuttle program. Their astronauts would fly, their cosmonauts would fly with us, and our astronauts would fly with them because we got to have Russians and Americans on the International Space Station so they can operate their own systems. If we only have people from one country there, then we can't operate the other, and that would be the end of the ISS. And we want to extend it to 2030 at least. So here's some picture on the bottom, shows our remote cameras. Here's one of my pictures. You might recognize the VAB as a streak shot of Crew 4 from about 2 years ago. And so that was just really wonderful. And then here they go to the space station, and then they dock there's only 2 docking ports there. On the left is the US docking ports. And that's where Starliner will dock too, hopefully. Real quickly, I'll just talk about Lucy, another mission I saw that is going to 7 asteroids, actually, Trojans. Several in L4 and several in the later, in the L5 Trojans. So that's a real exciting mission. We've never visited those asteroids, and we'll be able to explore a whole range of different compositions of asteroids. And there's going to be a, next year, it's going to meet Donald Johanson in the asteroid belt, so it's going to do some things before it actually starts its main mission in 2027. And there may be future flybys possible too after 2033 when the mission ends, if they have enough fuel So they launched, they unlatched the solar panels, and the mission's going really well. There it is in the clean room, and several science instruments. There I am with it. And there's the science team behind me there. So again, it's a real privilege. There's a launch street there, and you can see there's a bird there too. It's a little hard to see, but there's a bird in that buoy. And so that was launched then back in 2021. Okay, and I think that's it then. Right. That's it. Yes. And so, thank you. Yeah. So I have my pictures for sale. Jean, are you over there? Yeah, there's Jean. Give her a hand. She was a speaker before. We're real partners. I'm so proud of her. And I've worked on her talk a lot. Never expected to actually do this talk. So, but anyway, I don't know if there's any books left, but we have our pictures, and she has her books and other space creations. So thank you for your attention.